Welcome! Today we have the first installment of Easy to Paint, a new series hopefully aimed at helping you get miniatures up and painted without making yourself crazy. Today we have X-Force Wolverine. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, hit the little bell, all the usual stuff that helps. We use Army Painter Color Primer Skeleton Bone as the primer for today's miniature. Wolverine comes to us from Atomic Mass Games Marvel Crisis Protocol. And the first color we've added is German Gray by Vallejo. As you can see, we lost a little bit of footage, but you can see the parts that need to be black. Remember to thin your paints throughout the process to make sure they're not too thick. And we'll go ahead and just get his codpiece done up to show you. Very simple. Don't worry about it if you go outside of the lines or where you're looking to be. We're going to touch all that up as we go. Also going to add a little bit of paint into the seam in his pants. We're going to go back over that later with an ink to get it really dark. But there's a couple things we want to touch up. Some of the color was a little light with its first pass, so we're going to darken that down with a second coat. Once we've got everything good and solid colored, we'll be back with the next step. Next up, we'll be using Dark Sea Gray, also by Vallejo. We'll use this for all of the cloth throughout his entire suit. We've decided not to go bare armed today, so we're going to be doing his arms as well. We'll use this color to carefully neaten up anywhere that the previous black went a little too far. As you can see, we also decided it would be easier to just paint the seams in gray and then put the ink in them later. But we'll go through here and touch up all the various parts to make sure everything gets a nice even coat. We'll go back and add a second layer just to make sure that we have a solid base color for all the things we're going to do to it in the future. Next up is the workhorse of this paint job, Citadel's Nolan Oil. We're going to apply this over everything, all of the gray and all of the black. And any little bits of spots that were missed or overlooked or still showing a little bit of that primer, this is going to turn them a nice shaded black. So we're going to go all over pretty much the entire model. We're going to try and make sure that where it pools in the places where there are separations between the different colors of fabric, with black and gray. And make sure that it doesn't pool anywhere too much as it dries. So we'll check on it a few times. If it starts to pool, we'll just move it around so that it doesn't give us too stark a pool. Now we're going to use carbon black and ink. Now this ink is very important for this particular model and this particular color scheme, because what this is going to do is allow us to have a deep dark black in between where colors meet. We're going to do it down the seam of his leg. We're also going to do it pretty much anywhere that the black and the gray meet. And because we use a soft black for the black here, this dark, intense black is going to create a really nice shadow that's going to define where the colors start and the colors stop. This is going to really help add depth to this miniature without having to add a ton of work on our end to get that depth. Now, when applying ink like this and inking or lining, it's okay if you miss a little bit, because we're going to touch it up with highlights, which are going to cover where the ink goes when it's not supposed to, and we can always go back and touch up the color around the ink if we need to. We're also going to go ahead and ink the different details out of his boots away from each other, so that it'll give us a little bit of shadow within his boots too. Since again we use that soft black, so this dark black is a perfect way to add shadows to an already light black without having to go crazy and making ourselves absolutely nuts looking for small details. This is kind of a lengthy and painstaking process. This is probably the hardest part of the entire thing we're going to do today. So just slowly go through and do it one little section at a time. Look for patterns and shapes that you can just kind of trace. Take your time. Don't worry too much if you make small mistakes, but touch it up in the next step or two. And I believe that you can do this. Next up is kind of a cleanup step as well as a highlight step. We'll be able to do both simultaneously. We're going to use that same dark sea green with an older, a little more tattered brush, and we're going to dry brush it. So I'm going to get a little bit of the excess paint off on the model. I'm going to paint all of that dark sea green, gray eventually anyway. So I'm going to make sure that there's a very little bit of paint. I just want to go around. And because we're using dark sea gray as a base, it's the perfect color to highlight it, and because we're using a soft black, it also works well as an edge highlighting for dark black colors too. So you don't want to hard dry brush the entire model. We want to kind of pick and choose where we want it to go, but we definitely want to get some of the higher raised parts of it to be brightened up this way. The other big thing that this is going to do is this is going to allow us to clean up where the ink was, so that we get nice crisp lines without having to go crazy and trying to get them in with a razor thin brush. We can just kind of dry brush over where the ink was, and a natural line will form as we clean it up. As you can see, that's starting to give us a nice crisp line down the seam of his pants, and we didn't have to do a whole lot to get that effect, which is really the end goal here, is to get really sharp, clean effects without having to drive ourselves crazy doing it meticulously. Next up, we're going to use Mephiston Red to add some iconic X-Force Red pop to this color palette. Since we've got such a limited color palette going on, these little bits of red are really going to make a difference in the way the model looks, especially from a short distance. We're going to carefully go around using the edge of the brush to get just the highest points of this X in a circle. Then we're going to start on the eyes. Now, eyes are always troublesome, especially when it's like this. So what we're going to actually do is we're going to paint the eye and the area around the eye. As you can see, I am going to try and get just the eye, but that's probably not going to work. And it's not going to be easy for you to replicate successfully, because it's one of those things that you just learn to do after you've done it for a long period of time. So instead, what we're going to do to make this a little easier on new folks and to show you a technique to do it with a higher success rate, we're going to paint the entirety of the eye red, including all the areas around the eye. We're going to try not to get outside of where the mask dips, but we are going to go ahead and use an appropriately thin amount of red to get in there. And while we do cleanup later, we're going to paint the black back in around the red, which will be easier than trying to get the red into that little bitty area. Apparently we lost the footage of me actually doing that, but what we did was we took the same black we've been using, that German gray, which is probably my favorite soft black I've ever encountered, and with the small brush I just made slightly smaller and slightly smaller brush strokes until I got the red where it just showed in the middle of the eye. What we're going to do now is, because I've decided that the black is a little too soft now, that I want it to actually be a little darker, is I'm going to use that contrast black from Citadel. Because it's such a thin paint, it's going to darken the color underneath it pretty significantly without taking us into the jet black range, which is what I wanted to avoid here. Remember that as we go, any mistakes you make or anything you're not happy with, you can always just go back and touch up in between the steps. Don't ever feel like you have to accept it the way it is, or that that's the best that you can do. You can always go back and touch it up neatly with the limited color palette here, and with all the colors so close to each other as far as depths go, it's easy to go back and just kind of touch up anything you're not happy with. Next up is a necessary evil. We're going to have to get this base resolved. So we're going to go through and we're going to use that same light gray color, deep sea gray, and we're going to paint all of the stone around the base. Now for my X-Force guys, I've got a specific combination of this color and washes that I've been using to kind of give them some unity. So the first step will be to apply the dark sea green to all of the stone and try to avoid the metal. This next part's not hard at all, thankfully. So we got some gunmetal here. We're going to go ahead and use it to color in that grate and to color in the claws on Wolverine's hands. Next up, we're going to use Talon Flesh to fix and get his exposed part of his face resolved. We'll just go in and put a layer of that down. Again, this is one of those thicker paints, so make sure you water it down, and if you have to go back and add a second layer to clean it up, that's definitely the way to do it. Now we're getting into the smaller details that we just need a little bit of. We're going to try and get in there and get his teeth done. Make sure that when you're using a white anyway, that you've got it adequately watered down and that it's able to go on smoothly, or you're going to have a bad time. Next, we're going to take Heavy Red by Vallejo and mix it 1-to-1 with Cold White. You only need a dab of this so we can make his tongue correct. This will also help us thin the teeth for any of the white that got behind where it should be. These are steps that are completely optional at this point. We're just trying to make the best we can out of this miniature. Now it's time to touch up and shape the face a little bit for anywhere the black got in or the teeth got over. This way we can frame the teeth a little better, and we can also make sure that the black of the mask isn't over parts of the face that we want to be out and not masked. With all that done, we're going to go back to our dark sea gray, and we're going to use a very small amount of paint in just some extra little bits of detail where we want them to pop a little bit more. Around the pectoral muscles, we painted in the bridge of the nose. We just go through where these little bits of fabric where it's stretching across his chest muscles are, and go over them one more time so that they are a little brighter. Now it's time to shade that flesh a little bit. We're going to take a very small fine brush and we're going to carefully outline his face with the Riken flesh shade. It's alright if it touches the very lowest points and highest points of the top and bottom teeth, as that'll create a shadow, but you don't want to touch all the teeth if you can help it. After that, we'll go to our next step in shading the base using Vallejo's blue wash. Now this will go over the entire base except for the metal, so we will not put this on the metal. We're going to apply this liberally so it'll be relatively thick. Now we're going to go over the entire base and all of the metal with null oil gloss. And for a finishing touch, we're going to rim the entire base in black, just like all the other X-Force bases. This way they all look very similar, so they have a team cohesive look to them. It's a real simple thing you can do that really brings a team together. This all done, once everything dries, it'll get a dull coat to seal everything in and keep it from getting chipped or damaged while we're using it in our videos or using it in play. Thank you again for stopping by. I hope you have a fantastic day. As a bonus, here's Bob, Agent of X-Force. Done pretty much the same way. The black in the cannon was done with the same inking technique that we used for Wolverine. Have a great day.